What's going on, folks? Today we're going to look at a popular TikTok video that just went a little bit viral. And after we watch it, we're going to look at the facts a little bit, okay? So I'm going to press play and I'll try not to interrupt it too much.
America is so racist. Why are Asians the highest earners in America?
Do you know that Asian Americans face the highest poverty rates in New York City? Chinatown restaurant and construction workers live here in 64 square feet cubicles for $9 a day. 1 in 4 elders live in poverty. Some collect 5-cent.
So, like, what percentage of other races in New York City have elders that live in poverty? It's just a completely out of context fact.
Elders live in poverty. Some collect 5-cent cans to make ends meet.
Okay, I'm already interrupting a lot, but, like, come on. I've seen people of all races. I've lived in many places in the U.S. I've lived in New York City, like I'm assuming she has. I've lived in Boston. I've lived in San Diego. I've lived in a couple of more random, lesser-known places. I've seen people of all races collecting 5-cent cans to make ends meet. Some collect. Yes, some people of all races do that. Again, what's the relevance to other races?
Or what about ICE deporting Cambodian Americans who came here as children fleeing from a
If
genocide
that's
that the
true, that's a
US helped
terrible thing.
create? But when you think of Asian Americans, you think Crazy Rich Asians and Netflix's Bling Empire.
No, I'm going to go back to that. No, I don't. What a condescending comment. I think of, like, the Danny, the salutatorian, so second place after valedictorian, Korean immigrant kid who ended up being the salutatorian of my high school. I think of all of the Asians I met in college, who are, like, at least 30% of my graduating class in college, who, generally speaking, were better students than me and most of the other non-Asian kids at the university. I don't think of crazy rich Asians. I have met a lot of Asian people well before I moved to Asia. I mean, Asian Americans and immigrants. That's who I think of. I think of my personal experiences. But we'll let her finish.
Empire. Only model minority stories are publicized, while disadvantaged Asian Americans get
I think that's
ignored.
kind
The
of true.
groups at the top were only led in the US if they were already rich and educated, and the groups at the bottom are usually refugees. This model
They're usually refugees. Um, I think there's a very good chance that that's true. What's kind of funny, I don't think she's trying to do this, but what she's showing us here is a chart with a bunch of, you could call them ethnicities, but they're really nationalities for different groups of Asians. And I think what she's trying to do here is tell us how different groups are different, and not all Asians are the same. But the thing is, like, if we look at Taiwanese, they're at the very top. They're like the wealthiest, along with Indians and Malaysians. Not all Indian Americans are the same. There's also wealthy and poor Indian Americans as well. I've met both. This is not really a very good way to combat stereotyping because all you're teaching me is that this subgroup of Asians is wealthy. And then I'm going to think, oh, if I'm a stereotyping kind of person, this isn't going to help because I'm going to be like, oh, you're Indian, so you're probably rich, right? Or at the bottom we have Burmese. Oh, you're from Burma. Oh, so you're poor, right? Like, it doesn't really help with the stereotyping thing. It's just making me better at stereotyping.
This model minority myth not only erases Asian suffering and struggles, it's also used to demonize the Black and Latino community for living in poverty by denying the existence of systemic racism.
So that whole thing doesn't make sense because, and we're going to examine whether this is a myth, whether Asians are a model minority, generally speaking. And then for denying the existence of systemic racism, I believe that that happens. I don't really think it's, I mean, you could say fair. I just don't think it's accurate to say that talking about the successes of Asians is like trying to erase or deny things. Rather, I mean, I talk about it, and I don't talk about it like Asians good, non-Asians bad. That's not true, but there are things that Asians do well that everybody else is just not doing well. Talking about that can help others do better. If you think that there's no difference between what Asians do in terms of how they raise their children, then you might think, well, that doesn't make sense, but there are big differences. And we can talk about that. But first, I did say that we're going to actually fact check this, right? So we're going to switch over to Excel. All right, so I actually downloaded some data, and I'm gonna turn my little image off here in a minute. So this is data from the U.S. Census Bureau, and this shows data from, it says on the left 1967 to 2019. we're going to be looking at just 2002 to 2019 because for reasons I couldn't tell you, the U.S. Census Bureau doesn't have clear information on Asian income from before 2002. So we're just going to have to use 2002 to 2019. Let's say including 2002, that's an 18-year time period, or in other words, that's the span of one childhood. So I'm going to turn me off. Nope, me. Okay, there we go. All right. So I made a little column here in the middle called the difference, and we're going to use this to examine the data. So she seemed to be implying that there's a lot of poor Asians. I don't know how much is a lot, but they certainly exist. And right here, we're just going to highlight this cell, nice and yellow. $20,000, 636 in the year 2019. That's how much as you can see, Asian households. So all the earners in that household combined made $20,636. And this is the lowest fifth. So what that means is that the low out of all incomes earned, the lowest 20% of incomes are on average, or the median is that much. For white people, it's $17,028. So that's about $3,600 lower. $3,600 lower than Asians. And we'll just calculate the difference. You don't have to believe me. We'll just do this minus this. Yep, it's about 3,600. Now what's curious is how this has changed over time, because I could just show you the 2019 data. That's the most recent data released. But I want to see the difference over time. So let's take a look. So interestingly enough, there's been some years, you can see like 2003, barely 2005, a couple of years where poor white Americans have done better than Asians, but for the vast majority of years, poor Asians have had a lot more money, basically, than poor white people. So really on the poverty axis, like just thinking about it, understanding it, poor Asians in general, I mean, we can just count. There's like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 out of 18 years. So 2/3 of the time, poor Asians have been significantly out-earning poor white people. So, and I'm just comparing this because white people constitute the majority of the U.S.'s population, and often the comparison is made like, well, Asians are out-earning white people. So that's why I'm making this comparison. But let's not stop there, because she's talking about poor people, and then she said something about crazy rich Asians. We can just look at the top 5%. That's like obviously the top 5 wealthiest. Yeah, 577,000 household. For white people is 460. So that was $100,000 more per year per household for rich Asians versus rich white people. It's a big difference. But it is true that the top 5% of Asians don't represent most Asians, right? So let's take a look over here. The middle fifth, these are the people right in the middle, between the 40% and the 60% ranges, or excuse me, within the 40 to 60% range. So people right in the middle, the most average of the average. And we get 98,700 a year. For white people in the exact same proportion, the exact same range, 72,000. So let's see what the difference is. 26,000. 26,000 more dollars per year. Wow. That's like a new car. That's how much money that is. It's a new car, pre-tax, obviously. And again, let's just like pull this down and see what happens. So what's interesting is that back in 2002, it was only 11,000. And I know inflation, of course, causes things to change, right? Like money is worth every dollar is worth less over time. Every dollar becomes worth less. So instead of looking at the raw dollar amounts, instead we can just compare 2019 dollars versus 2019 dollars, 2018, and so on. It's called a proportion. We'll just do equals 98 divided by, or I should say, Asian 2019 versus white 2019. Now we don't want a currency, we want a percentage. Where are you? Okay, 136. And of course it's not 136% more, it's just 36% more. Now let's drag this down. So back in 2002, the average Asian household was earning about 18% more than the average white household back in 2002. Now it's up to 36% more than the average white household. So not only has 18 years ago, an entire childhood ago, some kids that were born in 2002 are now adults today. Not only was there already a pretty big, sizable gap that long ago, the gap has more than doubled over the past 18 years. Between 2002 and 2019, the gap, Asians have more than doubled the gap. And this is not all Asians. This is just comparing the middle fifth of Asians versus the middle fifth of white people. So I think that really says it all. You can see between the poorest Asians and the poorest white people, the poorest Asians come out on top 2/3 of the time. Every year, the middle income Asians and white people, the middle income Asians are quite a lot richer and have been getting even richer and even richer every year, gaining ground on white, or I should say, increasing the space between them and white people every year. And we can just do this for the top 5% of Asians, just for funsies. This divided by this minus 1, 25%. Oops, that looks ugly. Alright, so that's actually I didn't do this before, I didn't look it up ahead of time. That's interesting. So I can't really say it's been a consistent gain. I mean, there's been some big years like 2013. 2009 was a big year. I'm assuming it probably was that a lot of very rich Asians came into the US during that year, during the wake of the financial crisis, whereas there weren't enough rich white people coming into the US to balance out those numbers. That's my guess. But anyways, I hope I'm gonna turn me back on now. I hope that clarifies the issue here. She's making, again, back to Miss TikTok over here. She's making the argument that like America's overlooking poor Asians, and I'm sure in some way that's true. But it's also just a fact that the most average of average Asian households, just regular people, not high-achieving Asians, just normal Asians, are kicking white people's butts. White people of the same class, who relative to their peers are performing the same, average Asians, not rich Asians, just regular ones, are $26,000 a year richer than average white people in 2019. And we can see with the poor ones too, most of the time, poor Asians are doing much better, like thousands of dollars better than poor white people, which makes a big difference when you're poor. $3,600 more dollars, that's a lot of money for a poor person. So I'm sure that, there's some truth to the idea that we're overlooking poor Asians or something, especially in New York City. But we can't even say that poor Asians are doing worse than poor white people. They're just not. At like every income bracket, the Asians are always doing better. So, I mean, look, I don't really have much more to say. I think that makes the point pretty clearly. But this was a pretty disingenuous video, unless her point was like to tell us that there are poor Asians and they need our help, and she didn't say that. This whole thing seemed to be some sort of like woke, oh, we don't talk about poor Asians because we want to keep black people down. No, we just don't talk about poor Asians because they're the richest poor race. Like, that's not really good terminology. Like, of all the races, poor Asians are the richest, objectively. So actually, out of all races, poor people, they need financial help the least. Poor black people, even poor white people, need more help than poor Asian people. That's why we don't talk about them. They need less help. Like, we don't talk about how rich white people need help, do we? Because they don't really need much help. They're not like the most aggrieved, the most hurt, the most needy people. It's really that simple. So anyways, that's it. I mean, I could keep going, but I don't want to bore people. Just wanted to kind of clarify what's going on here. It's not about denying the existence of systemic racism. It's just because they're doing the best. That's all.